Is Leviticus an outdated book that we can just skip over? Or is it something worth paying attention to?
Let's spend some time in God's holy word, looking for a sign in God's holy word. So let's start hearing those stories new and old from these two brothers. Hot takes and beer that's cold, they go together like pasta and meatballs. They're undeterred, bringing you God's holy word. Holy word. It's a grain offering, bringing you God's holy word.
Hey, Jeff, what are we doing here?
Hey, Jeremy, that's a great question. So you and I both like the Bible, and you and I both like beer. So we decided to put them together in something called the grain offering, and just do a book of the Bible for every episode, and really do a deep dive into it, what it says, who wrote it, what it means, what we think it means, all that good stuff. So that's what we're doing. We like beer, we like the Bible, and what's funny is that this particular episode we're going to be covering the book of Leviticus, and that's actually where the name of the show comes from, because in Leviticus you have a couple of different passages that talk about the grain offering and how to present it to the God and all that sort of stuff. So that's in today's episode.
Nice. All right. Well, I'm going to hit you with the hardest theological question to date. So
okay. I think
hopefully you're ready for it.
I think I'm ready.
What beer are you drinking today?
I don't know if I had quite figured that out yet before I graduated seminary, so I'm just kidding. So today I have chosen a Saint Bernardus triple, and the reason I have
get a bigger close up on the face there,
if you can see it.
That's a jolly looking priest.
That's a jolly looking
monk.
Well,
monk,
priest. I'd be jolly too if my job was talking about Jesus and brewing beer.
That's fair.
So the reason I chose this one is it is a Belgian Abbey ale, and it was described as, I've never had it before, but it was described as having this very sweet smelling aroma and kind of a smooth, sweet flavor. And I thought that would pair really, really well with Leviticus, because one of the main points of Leviticus, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is the idea that if you follow the law, if you abide by the law and do all the things that God commands, then life will be sweet for you. Your sacrifice will issue a sweet aroma unto the Lord. So sweet aroma,
pleasing to the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
What about you? What beer have you chosen? Another Fat Tire?
No, not Fat Tire today. We are drinking a Breckenridge Brewery Fine Colorado Ale, a vanilla porter.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I've never had this before.
Okay.
No clue if it's good. We'll find out. I like vanilla. I like dark beers.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's that time. So let's crack it open and get going into Leviticus. Oh gosh. I got it. Hold on. I got it. I got
to
it.
Beat you this time.
All right. Cheers, brother.
Oh, clink. There we go.
Prost. Man, that ain't no sweet aroma. That smells like old yeast.
You must be sinning, man.
I guess so. I can't be as jolly as the monk on the label.
Yeah, this, however, is pretty good. I think it's exactly like what you would expect. So
yeah,
can't complain there.
I mean, this isn't bad. It's just not the sweet aroma I was expecting. But that is actually
thus is our sacrifices to the Lord, right?
I was going to say, like, it sounds very much like Leviticus already. Like, oh, my aroma is not as pleasing to the Lord as I thought. Huh?
Yeah, useless are your sacrifices and your ritual offerings.
Yep.
All I want is, what is it? Pure worship, pure praise.
Uh, gosh, I just read this too. It's in Hosea.
Yeah.
Uh, I do not require sacrifice. Just yeah, I'd have to look it up, but I'll put it in the bottom of the.
Boom, right here.
Yeah. All right. So
Thus saith the Lord.
thus saith the Lord. All right, Jeremy. So we've had our beer. We've done the cheers. We started drinking.
Mhm.
We've smelled in old
Responsibly.
responsibly, of course. So let's dive into kind of the overview of Leviticus, and then we'll
Yeah.
get going into the questions. Now, I was telling you a little bit pre-show that I don't think that this episode is going to be as long as some of as Exodus and the Genesis episodes were, but
Wow.
you know us, we start talking, and then all of a sudden it's an hour and a half later. So we
I would say this is that it definitely could be.
yeah
Leviticus reads very, very differently, and I don't want to hijack any of your prep here, but Leviticus reads very differently than some of the other books of the Pentateuch.
Mhm.
We'll get into this, I'm sure, but the authorship, um, it's written for a specific audience, and that audience is priests who are
Right.
highly technical,
Right.
highly educated in their craft and their practice. So Book of Leviticus is really good about telling you how to do things, but not necessarily as great at the why.
Yeah, totally.
So it could go quick,
Mhm.
but the deeper you dive with Leviticus, the more you're going to realize that it's a deep book.
Right. And I think that that's a perfect point, because one of the college guys that I've been discipling through this past year, I gave him the choice of any book of the Bible to study. And I said, like, you choose it, we'll study it together. And he chose Leviticus. And one of the things that he is
You're like, that one?
yeah, exactly.
All the books in the Bible?
So it makes me think of Arrested Development, when Michael Cera's character is dating Anne,
Mhm.
and his dad's just like, her.
Yeah.
But what he's beginning to kind of see in the book of Leviticus is that there's so much more to say than just these strict Levitical laws. There's so much
Mhm.
more there than just kind of this dry legalistic.
Yeah.
So
I mean, and to whet the viewer's appetite for that kind of thing, um, people love talking about Jesus. That one dude in the Bible. They love talking about him and how he says, love your neighbor.
mhm,
That is from Leviticus. He's
yeah,
not making that up. He's not pulling that out of thin air.
right.
Um, he's quoting an outdated book. So
Yeah, and that's such a good point too, because like I think that there when people have poor theology, and what I mean by that is that it's not very nuanced, when it's very kind of black and white, when it's kind of very surfacey, that sort of thing. So when I say bad
sure.
theology, I mean someone or people who have not put a lot of work into like digging deeper.
Yeah. Bad theology, like, you know, do good and you'll be blessed, and do bad and you'll be cursed.
Yeah, name it and claim it. God wants you to be healthy, wealthy, and free, like all that sort of.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
I, I don't. Not even going to touch that one today.
That was an intentional joke on Leviticus's part. You can't get to Proverbs and or you can't get to Ecclesiastes wisdom without Proverbs wisdom.
Right. Right.
And same thing, you can't get to. Well, I mean, we'll maybe get here, but you can't get to grace without Levitical law.
Right. And that's
maybe I don't know.
that's what I was going to say. When you have bad theology or poor theology, what it can become is like, oh well, Jesus like summarized the law, so all we have to do is follow what Jesus says, like love God, love your neighbor. Like, okay, but Jesus's role was also to fulfill the law, to bring it to its completion. So
Right.
to just focus on what Jesus has to say is important, but you have to understand where it comes from and where it originates, because then you can understand that Jesus is the fulfillment of the Jewish law as laid down in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So I think that we need to have a very nuanced understanding of the law, because we need to know exactly to what extent Jesus fulfills it later on.
Yeah, and it is interesting because, yes, nuance is key in understanding the Bible. Nuance is key in understanding the Old Testament in particular, in understanding Jesus. Jesus is a Jewish rabbi, first and foremost, right?
So spoiler alert.
Well, okay, I shouldn't say Jesus is the Lord and Savior of the world, first and foremost. Secondary to that, he is a Jewish rabbi.
Mm-hmm. He existed in a time and space that he was a Jewish rabbi. So
yeah, the divine incarnate in a Jewish rabbi.
Yeah.
So like Jesus knew Leviticus, right? And to your point, like nuance is key in understanding that and having a deep understanding. And I would also maybe push back a bit and say that there's a difference between poor theology, right? Where you don't do the work and you just kind of cherry pick what you want and build a Christ-based faith without Christ, right? And that can mean whatever you want it to mean, viewers, right? Like, but there is something to be said about Jesus summarizing those commandments and saying, like, yeah, like, I think it's the rich young ruler who says, what's the greatest commandment? And it's like, well, like, love God. And well, he says, like, the law. What's the law? And then he's like, oh, 10 commandments, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, well, love God, love your neighbor. Boom. That'll do it. So like, yes, nuance is important and so vital to understanding this ancient text, and why these stories have endured for as long as they have.
Sure.
And
yeah. So can I push back a little bit on what you said about the rich young ruler?
Sure.
Not that what you said is wrong. I just want to clarify the context of that story. So he approaches Jesus and says, what do I do, or what must I do to inherit eternal life? Yeah. And Jesus says, okay, well, you know the law. What does it say? And then he says, love God, love your neighbor. And Jesus is like, yeah, you're right. Do that and you'll live. And then it says, but in order to justify himself, he's just like, but what else?
Right.
So, but I think one of the things that I come back to about Leviticus and the 10 Commandments in general, and it's funny that we're talking about this because here at the church I work at in Santa Barbara, we just got done preaching through the 10 Commandments. And one of the things that our lead pastor, Eric, kind of had as a kind of a baseline throughout all of his sermons was that the 10 Commandments command something, but they also commend something else. So like, for instance, like the you shall not murder commands not murdering, but it commends upholding and pursuing life for all people. So there's this command and commend push and pull that you have. And then Jesus comes along and he raises the bar on all of that. Because like, for instance, he says in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, I believe it is, where he's just like, you've heard it said, you shall not kill. But I say to you, like, whoever's angry with their brother or sister is guilty of murder in their heart. It's just like, wait, what now?
Yeah.
But again, I think that getting into that being the reality that the Jewish people were in during the time of Jesus, I think what happens, and you can see it all throughout the Old Testament, is the law is established, but whenever there's a set of rules or commandments that are set down, we as humans have this urgency and this need to kind of find the loopholes and the it's just like, okay, well, where's the line? Like, how far can I go? Like, if I don't physically murder my neighbor, is that okay? But can I like hit him?
If I just like maim him a little bit?
Yeah, if I just, hit him on the head and he doesn't wake up for a few days, like, is that okay? Like,
Right. Yeah.
So Okay, so we've gotten into a little bit of the context of what Leviticus talks about, but I wanted to go over just the overview and then kind of launch into the questions. And the questions are kind of open ended. I mean, as they always are,
As they
um,
need to be.
as they need to be. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so again, the notes that I've come up with are based on several different sources that I have in my own library, and then also some internet research and stuff like that. I do a lot of research. What can I say? I I haven't broken that habit from being in grad school and seminary yet. Um, so a lot of theologians can agree that Moses is seen as the author of Leviticus. We've talked a little bit about how that could be a little bit problematic, like it could be, but what we know is that most scholarship kind of agrees that Moses is the author of the Pentateuch. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you can push back on that if you want, or
Yeah, I mean, nothing new really than what I've said in, I think it was the Genesis episode when we first talked about it.
yeah,
Just like, yeah, Moses, sure. Okay. But you really take the deep dive, and this is especially important with Leviticus,
mm,
or if not especially important, especially able to be seen and demonstrated.
yeah,
Um, the authorship of Leviticus, the difference in it, in the way it's written, is strikingly different
mm,
to that of some of the previous books,
mm,
being Genesis and Exodus.
mm,
Um, and again, what scholars have looked at and discovered from looking at very detailed um, writings and ancient texts of these books, um, is that again these books are probably composite books with multiple authors.
right,
Genesis, it's um, four authors, four groupings of authors that
right,
that a theory
right,
proposes,
right,
um, based off of using certain names for God in some contexts, certain names for others in some contexts.
right.
And this is probably better to be brought up in Deuteronomy, but
Mm.
some jargony lingo is the Deuteronomistic, or Deuter I've been out of seminary for a while. The Deuteronomistic history.
Deuteronomic.
That's another way. So
Yeah, and it's
um,
kind of like what you mentioned too with the stories in Genesis as well, kind of revolving around the patriarchs and how the
yeah,
different tribal groupings of Israel had different patriarchs as their kind of point of reference in history. So Genesis is kind of ordering all of them to show that all of Israel belongs to this one story. But that again could be part of the reason why we can kind of point to, well, Moses could have written it, or it could have been a
mhm,
compilation of all these authors putting them together for the sake of telling one unified story.
yeah, yeah. And again, coming back to the specifics of language in these books, Leviticus is highly technical,
Hmm.
highly specific in a way that other parts of the Bible are not, right? Like, I think it's pretty easy to read the book of Psalms and be like, okay, this is different than like the epics of David or Saul,
Yeah,
right? This is
yeah,
different than history, or different than genealogy. That makes sense.
yeah.
But Leviticus is different in a way that I think it's hard to put our fingers on.
Hmm.
And again, it comes back to that this is a book written, and even before I get there, Leviticus is a book of instruction for priests on how to commit and fulfill their priestly duties.
Right. So
And
it's
we
more or less for I mean, the name, the origin of the name, we can track to the tribe of Levi as the
mhm,
priests responsible for performing all these things for Israel.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And we've talked in previous episodes about how it wasn't until um, the exilic times that the Israelites even put together their history and their stories
Yeah.
in writing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So So Leviticus, what you see, um, along with being a priestly text, before we get to the written part, we have this oral history, this oral instruction that is highly repetitive.
Hmm.
Um, because our brains are able to memorize rhythm and sound better than just random instructions.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Um,
Rhythm and cadence and rhyme, and
yeah.
I mean that's just a brief side note, but that's why Psalm 119, the longest chapter of the Bible, is broken up by uh, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So the thought was is that when young Hebrew children are learning the Psalms, they can associate a section of 119 with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
Hmm.
So again, it's these memorization techniques.
Yeah. So you have these priests memorizing the book of Leviticus, or I should say, memorizing what will become the book of Leviticus.
Right, right,
Um, and just that in and of itself can kind of tip us off to the type of authorship that comes later on, right?
hmm
Because again, Moses wasn't around during the exile writing these stories down.
right, right.
And even if pen went to papyrus earlier,
Hmm.
to um, get these instructions written down in what would have been a language that is not recognized as Hebrew, right?
Right,
Because that's how written language comes to be.
right,
Um, it would it would be written by someone highly um, involved and understanding the technical nature of what being a priest is like for Israel in this particular time period,
right.
because these practices change throughout the history of Israel.
Right, absolutely, because the way that you go about presenting sacrifices in the tabernacle differ from when you have the temple that Solomon builds in Jerusalem.
Mhm.
So, and then
And,
also
and
like, after the temple in Jerusalem falls in 70 AD, like therefore abolishing the sacrificial system, like how does the priest function at that point? You
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And
So
and I
actually,
should say it's not night and day differences, right?
sure,
How they're changing is indeed change, but
yeah,
the intention, at least um, story, at least narrative wise, for the tabernacle is that it's just a moving form of the temple.
right,
Um,
right.
but that's really neither here nor there for
Sure, sure.
right
And
now.
that's actually a good segue because like we talk about dates and I think what I'm skeptical of when I say oh this is the date that is written is because it's the date that we kind of think it was compilated around or compiled around, but like there's no pinpointing like August 7th, 1455
Yeah,
BC. Like there's just that's impossible to do. So when I say the date written, I always say approximately, simply because we can't nail down a hard date on it. So
right.
that being
Because the
said,
other thing too,
yeah,
if
yeah,
if I can jump in with
yeah,
that in particular, is that our dating for these texts, and whether they're biblical texts or extra biblical texts or just like any ancient text,
yeah,
usually our our um our timing for them comes down to, all right, we're going to take a tiny piece of the paper or a tiny piece of the rock that these are etched on, grind it down and see how old it is.
right, right,
And that could be very different between finding a text that is dated approximately at, like, I don't know, I'm gonna just make some numbers up,
yeah,
right? Like
go for it.
800 um, BCE, right?
Mhm,
If you find a text that dates to that year or that amount of time,
mhm,
and then you find a similar text that is 400 BCE, when was it written? Was it written at the first one? Was it written later on?
right,
And
right,
then looking at the stories and the writings itself to
mhm,
see what has changed, and then that's how you can track what's developed. But these timing is not like Moses signing his name with, like, oh, it's like this year, this day.
Right,
This
right.
is,
Okay, so the approximate date that has been assigned to the writing of Leviticus is 1445 BC, 1445, and if I'm not mistaken, I think when we were talking about Exodus, Exodus was dated about 1450. So again, the idea being is that this is during the wilderness wanderings, and Moses is writing down all these things. At least that's the perception, right?
right,
Um,
right, right.
Now, what's interesting is what I like to do for these books, and we saw it with Genesis and also Exodus, is give like a date covered, just to kind of see, well, when is this
Mhm.
happening in history? How long does it apply for, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and when I was doing this one, I came across one article that was fascinating, and it put the date as the date covered of Leviticus being from 1445 BC to 70 AD. So like basically spanning the entire history of the Jewish people up until the destruction of the temple in
Right,
by the Romans in 70 AD. And I
right.
was at first I was just like, oh, I don't know about that. That's like really generous. But then I thought about it, I was like, well, if you think about it, like Jesus himself talks about Levitical law. He quotes
Mhm.
Levitical law. He fulfills Levitical law. So it's not that much of a stretch to think that Levitical law extended up until the moment that they couldn't perform the functions of the temple anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting timing, like that, because I hear that timing up, whatever, uh, BC to 70. Is that
Mhm.
what it is?
1445 BC to 70 AD. Yeah,
Yeah, so I hear that timing, and you know, this just gets into the weeds a little bit.
sure.
Um, but if the question is, when was the book of Leviticus um, functionally relevant to? Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
that works.
yeah.
Um, why not?
Well,
um,
I think it's worth mentioning too that that same article said that it's off and on for that period of time. Like
sure,
there's
sure.
large swaths of times, like generations, where the priests are just like, well, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, you look at the prophets. I was just reading Hosea today, and
Hmm.
God does not have very nice things to say about the priests during the time
Yeah.
of Hosea.
I mean, Leviticus is interesting because almost immediately the priests show uh, that they struggle to do their job,
Right.
right? Like the whole, I think it's 5 offerings to begin with.
Hmm.
The whole first 5 offerings are instructed and given great detail, and then it's broken up with a narrative portion
Right.
where Aaron's sons, Aaron, Moses's brother,
Hmm.
um, the high priest
Hmm.
of Israel, his sons immediately are like, okay, we're going to do whatever we want, and then get struck down or
Yeah.
get seriously hurt by God, right?
Yeah.
So
And
it doesn't take long at all.
that's a pretty common story too, because like I mean, at the very beginning of First Samuel, we have Samuel coming to the temple to learn under Eli the priest, and Eli's two sons are just completely corrupt. And like
Yeah, yeah,
there's I mean, one of the Levitical things is that priests were supposed to offer the meat sacrifice and like put it in this kettle and let it like basically boil, and
hmm,
they have this like ceremonial fork that after it's done boiling for a period, that you jab it in, and whatever you pull out is the priest's portion, right?
right, right,
So Eli's sons are described as like they throw the meat in like immediately like, haha, my portion.
right,
So like,
right.
which might seem stupid, but like that was actually like a huge deal because it
Yeah,
violated the Levitical priestly duty, right?
yeah. Which again, like, and this is just going to be a common theme as long as we're studying the Bible. Um, and like, I'm bringing it up.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
um, is like, is that because it is a common trope in the Bible? Maybe.
Mhm.
Is it in there multiple times, that theme, because like it says something inherent to humanity? Maybe. Is it because stories have multiple tellings but with different names of characters? Maybe, I don't know.
You seem to have a lot of questions and not a lot of answers.
Yeah.
And I feel like that perfectly summarizes seminary for at least me. It was just like, yeah, I have all these questions and I got some of them answered, but I graduated with
Oh
more.
yeah.
So like I said, 1445
Yeah.
BC to around 70 AD, off and on for then. What's interesting though is, again, looking at the different outlines and resources that I had. One of them in particular kind of lists the quote unquote famous stories of each book, like David and Goliath, Saul becoming king, those sorts of things. But what was fascinating to me is that when it got to Leviticus, it literally said no famous stories. So,
Okay.
which I thought was very interesting, because I think it kind of perpetuates this idea like, oh, Leviticus is like outdated, we like can just discard it and stuff like that.
Right.
But it also, to go back to what you said, it's not necessarily a narrative focused book. That's not the intention, that's not the purpose, that's not the point,
Right.
So the idea of Leviticus being this book that, like, we're going to tell our kids, we're going to sing our or read our kids bedtime stories out of Leviticus, like, probably won't happen.
Right. It's an instruction manual.
Yeah, it's an instruction manual. It's like, it would be similar to, getting a brand new TV or a brand new camera and like reading the instruction book to your kid for stories. It's like,
Hmm.
it's not, you wouldn't do that, because
Yeah.
that's not the point.
Yeah.
Um, but I can say that Leviticus is broken up into two major story arcs, and like we've been doing with every book that we've covered, we're kind of talking about this meta narrative approach. So like this 30,000 foot view of the books of the Bible, and Leviticus in particular can be broken down into kind of two main sections. Chapters 1 through 10 talk about approaching the holiness of God. So purifying yourself, being ready to enter into the Holy of Holies, all that stuff. And then the second half of Leviticus, chapters 11 through 27, is about what you can do to become holy like God is holy. So the first section, approaching holiness, chapters 1 through 10, and then becoming holy yourself like God is holy, chapters 11 through 27. So the question I have, Jeremy,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
this first section, because the approaching holiness is all about the offerings of like what they consist of, how to present them, what they cover, all those things. And my first question is, why so many different forms of offering? Why not just one, like, hey, here's a dove, we good?
Here's a dove, we good. That should be a shirt. Yeah, so I mean, you already dropped the lingo meta narrative.
Yeah.
But have yet to break out of the walls of Leviticus itself in that meta narrative.
Yeah, it's true.
A really short way of describing this long answer is that you look to Exodus, where the people of Israel are property. They're being used as a resource by Egypt. They're freed from slavery, brought into the wilderness, and this is their first taste of freedom. And freedom is an interesting thing, because without guidelines, without you could call it discipline, you could call it and discipline in the sense of like, this is a discipline of mine, like to wake up at X time each morning, not discipline as in dropping the hammer.
Right.
But without discipline, without rhythm, without guidelines, freedom can be a fickle thing, right? We see in the antebellum South, we have stories of slaves freed, who just return to what they know, because that is life for them, and that's what they have been doing their whole life, right? Um,
I mean, you also have, Jim Crow laws that don't make it truly a free, but that.
yeah, no, exactly that too. But that similar thinking, or that similar component is evident even in like the freedoms that we find in our day to day, right?
Yeah.
Like I think of and this is a mighty jump. So like this is an incredibly big conversation to jump from like antebellum South to ancient Israel to, a day off from work, right? Like these are all vastly different things.
Right.
But
Right.
on a day off, if I haven't decided, how I'm going to spend that day, I can just lose it to the fact of I don't know what to do today. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
a mindset of how to conduct myself
Yeah.
in this open-ended time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And that's a perfect example, because for me, what I began to realize about my week to week rhythm is that on Monday mornings I sit down and write out my to do list for the week, just to make sure I have everything and not miss all that. It's a way for me to keep organized, right?
Yeah.
But what I was finding is that for my Sabbath on Fridays, I was actually like writing down things to do on my Sabbath just to make sure that I got them done. And I think that goes to your point exactly, where I couldn't even fathom an existence where I didn't have to produce or achieve or do something, because that's what I do every other day of the week.
Right.
So if I wasn't careful, I could just fall back into that pattern of, well, I mean, I've done this all week, I might as well extend it to my day off.
You look to multiple times after Israel has left Egypt in the Old Testament, where they want to return to Egypt. They want to return to their chains. They want to return to their vices, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what they know. That's how they know life to be. There's a huge element to Exodus and Leviticus, really Exodus and the entire rest of the Bible. There's a huge aspect of, you can take the slaves out of Egypt, but getting Egypt out of the slaves is a whole different story.
Yeah. And
so you look at, yeah.
No, I was just gonna to mention, I think that's the same paradox we find with sin, where like you can take the human out of their sinful past, but it's hard to fully get the sin out of the human. So yeah, sorry, go ahead. What were you saying?
So Leviticus is an introduction of how to be human to Israel, and specifically by God's standards. The Israelites have functioned again as property. They've functioned as slaves. They've functioned as not fully human.
Right.
And Leviticus is is God's proclaiming, God's yelling at these stiff-necked people. Here's how you have right relationship with one another. Here's how you have right relationship with me. Here's how you have right relationship with the earth.
Yeah. Totally.
And it's hard to see, because we, in the current time that we live in, get caught up on the blood and the guts and the technicality of it all.
Right.
We also use Jesus as that prop of, well, Jesus just figured it all out for us, so we don't need to like examine that.
Right.
It's a quote dark past of Judeo-Christian theology to some people.
Yeah.
But what it is really, Leviticus, is that it's a what seems primitive to us is groundbreaking faith and theology, and again, ways of interacting with God, ways of interacting with each other, and ways of interacting with this earth.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't seem so as primitive when you look at when you can take a side by side of, I think of the earth component
Mm-hmm.
in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's talk about the fires in California, for instance. So Jeff and I hail from California, specifically the Bay Area. But you look at these wildfires, and scientists are getting to a place now of coming around to controlled burning, which had been the practice that indigenous people had observed and participated in all along.
Yeah.
Until us as civilized and enlightened white people
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
show up on the scene and say, well, that's not how I do it, so you must be wrong.
Right.
But
Right.
you look at some of the writing in Leviticus talking about the earth's ability to produce resources.
Yeah.
And how if you care properly for the earth will provide abundantly, which it's also been shown that the reason hunger in the world is not because we can't produce enough food.
Right. Yeah.
It's because those in power choose to hoard resources.
Yeah. Yeah. And create the unnecessary need that drives disasters. Yeah.
There's some stats, and this is probably an outdated stat at this point, but I heard it the other day that it would cost X amount, like $20 billion or something,
Mm-hmm.
to solve world hunger. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is the amount, again, an outdated statistic, but that amount is the same that North Americans, United States people, spend on ice cream in 1 year.
My gosh.
So if we can go a year without ice cream, we can solve world hunger, maybe. But I bring that
to me.
Again, I bring that all up because Leviticus talks about, reaping your harvest and letting the soil recharge, letting the soil recuperate.
Yeah, letting the field lay fallow.
Yeah.
Or rotating crops, or yeah.
Which again, scientists now they're like, oh, if we change our crops, that, I think that was a huge revolutionary America. You might be able to speak into this. They exhausted the land, and part of the reason the United States, quote, needed to expand west is we need more land for our crops. We're our tobacco fields, our or whatever crop is the flavor of the month. It's exhausting the land, so we need more.
We need more land. Yeah,
we need more land. But if you were to just let the ground lay fallow and embrace some of this ancient wisdom, then you might not need to act like the world is a finite resource, which in those words sounds reckless, right? But all of a sudden, under that side-by-side lens and nuanced lens, albeit, all of a sudden this quote primitive book of Leviticus has some very relevant content just underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And that's just talking about harvesting and farming. And I'm not a farmer, so go ask a farmer.
Yeah. And if you're a farmer watching, let us know. But no, that's such an excellent point, Jeremy. And I, as you were talking, it brought back a lot of memories for me of one of the most profound classes that I took in undergrad at Berkeley was history of the American West. But what it was is it was an environmental history of the American West. So talking about westward expansion and the how like the Homestead Act and the Gold Rush and all these things impacted the environment, and all that sort of stuff. But one of the main areas we focused on was the Dust Bowl of the late 1920s, early 1930s. And one of the big reasons the Dust Bowl was a thing is because during the 1900s, 1910s, and 1920s, Midwestern farmers were just like, oh, I forget what it was. It might have been corn or wheat or whatever the crop, the flavor of the week was. It was
That's a
straight
fast
up,
crop.
huh?
1 week, 1 week. That's a fast crop.
Yeah, it is. It is. But whatever was the best selling crop also depleted the soil of all of its nutrients. But the need for money was far greater than the effect it had on the environment. And what ended up happening is that the topsoil was zapped of its nutrients, so it became this loose dirt that when you had these giant windstorms, it would just whip up all these things. And then you had the Dust Bowl, which wreaked havoc all across the American West. And I mean, again, to your point of like, all of a sudden, when you look back at Leviticus, a book that was written approximately, 1445 BC, all of a sudden has major implications for us to wisely steward our relationship to the world and to each other in 21st century America.
Yeah.
20th and 21st century, I should say.
The Bible, I'll say this, the authors of the Bible have a very different theology and relationship to the earth than I think a lot of Christian denominations do today.
Yeah.
I think often you come across Christian theologies that have a component of the earth doesn't matter. We're like out of here anyway, right?
Right. I mean, they where that's based off of is the passage in, oh gosh, I'll include it down here. I think it's Revelation, because I know it's often associated with Revelation, but I'm not, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm not quite sure if it is. But anyway, I'll cite it below. But it's basically talking about how the old earth and the old heaven will pass away, and then there will be a new earth. So a lot of evangelical Christians, especially in America, are just like, well, there's that. We don't have to worry. Like, I can just throw my styrofoam out in the ocean.
Yeah. I wasn't gonna name drop evangelicals, but
oh, dude,
you
name
did
drop.
it. So.
Go ahead. I am an evangelical pastor, for better and for worse. But no, I think that you're absolutely right, where the idea of Christians kind of taking what Jesus said and like, oh, well, Jesus fulfilled the law, so we don't have to take care of anything that the law requires us to anymore. Like, that's not quite true.
Yeah, I mean, and this whole sidebar came from like one part of Leviticus being about like land and right relationship with the earth, right?
Yeah.
So how much more so is that going to be true of the text overall, right?
Right. And I think that's actually a great, like, bringing us back in, because we often will go on these long tangents. So like bringing it back to the question of like, why are there so many different offerings? Mm-hmm. The grain offering and the peace offering in particular, I believe, are two that are required of Israelite farmers to present the first fruits of their harvest. So again, it goes back to that relationship of the land, of like, if you take in, if God blesses you abundantly with a large harvest, you're supposed to take the first fruits of that, the best of that crop, and present it to God as an offering, as a way to thank God for the continued faithfulness of producing,
Yeah.
So you look like you have something to say.
Yeah, I'm smiling because, I mean, it's a weird reason to smile, but, building off this idea that the side-by-side today has major implications. Yeah. People look at Leviticus and they see, animal sacrifice, okay?
Yeah.
And that puts them off, and rightfully so, because animal sacrifice, is what it is.
Yeah.
That said, the meat industry in America, probably worse.
Oh,
than the
100%.
Israelite sacrificial system, right? Like,
100%. Yeah.
you know, each each offering that involves animal sacrifice has terminology to the point of, it's an ox, a goat, a dove with no blemish, no, the
The
firstborn
best that
male,
you have.
yeah, which implies inherently to it, um, implies that these animals, you know that that goat or that dove or that oxen is the one. It is your best one.
Yeah.
And that's part of the give and take of the sacrificial system, is that it is indeed a sacrificial system,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Why would you sacrifice the best of your best? That's like, I was gonna say the Oakland A's, because we're both huge A's fans. But this might not mean much to, like, a Dodger fan or a Yankees fan, right?
Mhm.
It's like taking the best person in your lineup and saying, "Yeah, go elsewhere. Like, you're the
Yeah.
best we have, and we're gonna sacrifice you for the better." Not
Yeah.
and not like, "Huh," but like,
Like we're gonna trade you
we're
away
gonna
for
bench
some
you or
prospects
trade you.
Double A.
Yeah, so maybe the A's are a better sacrificial
Oh
system
yeah.
than we think.
I
That
mean,
said, though,
both you and I have adopted the Dodgers as our National League team because you went to
yeah,
school
yeah,
at UCLA and
that go Dodgers.
I now live in Santa Barbara. So like
Yeah.
we've adopted the Dodgers as our National League team, but I can say this in all good faith, knowing that the Dodgers organization doesn't really know what sacrifice means.
I do want to be clear here. Any corporation probably doesn't know what
Yes.
sacrifice means. So the A's are not, they're not the gold standard here.
Right.
Neither are the Dodgers. Neither are any corporation or, like,
Right.
usually money earning system.
Oh, of course.
Um,
But the point
but
is
yeah,
still there.
yeah, the sacrificial system, like, the Dodgers aren't going to bench Mookie
Yeah.
Betts for the World Series, um,
No.
in hopes that they're blessed
Right.
with
Right.
the title.
Right.
But circling all the way back, the implication is that your animals, that is going to cost you
Mhm.
to show how grateful you are.
Right.
Which is a complete turning on its side, especially with that side by side today of, like, we do not know where our meat comes from. And usually I want to throw in that, like, for anyone watching who's like, oh, I'm like, I know where my meat comes from. Okay.
Yeah. That's
we
the
hear
exception. That's not the norm. Or that's the exception. That's not the rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So major implications for, like, okay, you're having trouble with this sacrificial system outlined in Leviticus, but you're also eating a burger like once a week. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's what one of the functions of Leviticus does, if we read it correctly, is it has kind of not like guilt tripping, but kind of a reality check of some of the practices that we see. Because again, I think I may have explained this when we were talking about Genesis, but as a historian, one of the main ways of thinking about history, at least what a lot of people subscribe to, is that we're kind of on this linear path of, like, we're always progressing, we're always getting better, we're always achieving more and learning more and that sort of thing. So there's an inherent arrogance that comes with that, of like, oh well, those primitive Israelites back in Leviticus, like, look how inhumane they were to their animals and blah blah blah. And meanwhile, we're eating, a burger from a cow that was force fed. Like, it's so I think that when we look at history, we can't be arrogant, because when we judge history based on our own point of view of it, then that's what's called anachronistic thinking. And anachronistic thinking is a logical flaw in our thinking, because if we project back of like, oh well, look how primitive they were. I mean, it circles back to what we were saying of like, well, Leviticus actually has some good things to say about, like, how to take care of the land, so you know how to produce long term and you don't exhaust it. So I think that we have to be very careful when we go to our historical past and, like, judge it, because I don't think that that's necessarily like the right thing to do.
I also want to add this on. Part of the reason Leviticus, or it's a twofold thing right now. Um, Parts of the reason Leviticus is so adamant about animal sacrifice, two components. Keep again. Component one: most other societies were sacrificing children. Okay, like
Yeah.
let's not skip this.
Yeah, totally.
Most other ancient Near Eastern cultures honored their gods by sacrificing their firstborn children.
Hmm.
This is why when God says to Abraham, go sacrifice Isaac, Abraham isn't like, oh, why?
Yeah.
It's understood that,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
just
okay,
like,
that's what you do.
yeah, all right.
That's what you do. God, has blessed me. Okay, I'm going to sacrifice my child for the sake of being blessed more.
Right.
So already, this first component, stepping away from sacrificing, human children, a step in the right direction, maybe.
Yeah. It's
Radical for the time that this is being written. Radical for the time that this is taking place.
yeah.
And built into that as well, there's the repetitive nature of Leviticus, and like, okay, if you have an ox, sacrifice an ox. If you don't have an ox, sacrifice a goat. If you don't have a goat, sacrifice a dove.
Right.
Dove, pigeon.
Right.
And I think pigeon is like the last one.
Right.
But that's in place. And here's the kicker: that's in place because there's a recognition that not everybody is not everybody has access to the same resources.
Right.
The sacrificial system,
Which again, like, so great at understanding a nuanced perspective of life. Because like if Leviticus was just cut and dry, it'd be like everybody sacrifices an ox. But like the point being, and I might be jumping ahead of what you were going to say, but the point being is that no matter what your level of income, no matter what your level of societal prominence, there is still a requirement for you to sacrifice something to God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Outside looking in, the sacrificial system looks like a buy-in system. Okay.
Right.
And
Sure.
this is where history and theology can go wrong, right? Where I sacrificed an ox, I am like doing really well. God's going to bless me like so well.
Right.
Versus, oh, you only sacrificed a dove? Okay. Like, that's not the point of this outline in Leviticus. Leviticus is saying God has blessed us all. And yet we all don't have the same access to resources as one another. So bless or praise God and be thankful and approach the sacrificial system. Approach the table with what you have.
Yes. And what I was going to say, just kind of attacking onto that goes not only for your possessions, but also your own level of righteousness and unrighteousness. And the reason I say that is because one of the parables that Jesus talks about is there's this Pharisee who goes into the middle of the temple square where you're supposed to be, praying to God and stuff like that. And he's like, thank you, Lord, for not making me like that guy over there. And like there's a tax collector's over in the corner, like head down, like beating his chest, like, Lord, forgive me, like I'm sorry, and stuff like that. So the Pharisee is making this public display of like, I am righteous, he's unrighteous. Thank you, Lord, for making me like me and not like that dude. And then Jesus says to his disciples, truly, I tell you, the tax collector went home justified before the Lord. So I think it has a similar parallel to Leviticus of like the sacrifice. It doesn't matter if you have a lot or you have a little. The point is that everything has been given to you by God. So whether it's great or little, everything has been given to you by God.
And that everything is connected, right? Like,
yeah.
Because it's not just a personal sacrifice. Leviticus goes into great detail of, and like, these are sacrifices for my personal sin. These are sacrifices for our corporate sin. These are sacrifices for the sins of Israel as a nation.
Right.
Like two people can sin together and like have a justified sacrifice for that setting. But there's a whole different set of sacrificial offerings for the nation.
Yeah.
For sins known and unknown.
Yes. And that's I think therein lies the answer to our first question of like, why are there so many different offerings? And the point is like, there's a whole lot of different ways that you can thank God for what you have, what you've done, what you've not done, being grateful, being sorry. I mean, let's just run through these real quick. Burnt offering, grain offering, peace offering, guilt offering, sin offering, all of them address different areas of somebody's life. So the idea being that every aspect of your life, every interconnected point of your life, there is something to be thankful for and something to offer as an offering and as a sacrifice. Whether it's you done wrong and you done bad and you have to like present a sin offering, or you are rejoicing and you had a bumper crop, celebrating that and giving that before the Lord. Like that's boom or bust, thick or thin, good or bad, bad or worse. Like there's all aspects of your life, there's something to be thankful for and something to offer God. So I think that kind of summarizes why there's so many different areas of offerings, because there's different areas of your life that need to be offered. I think about it like this too, like and you know this as well, like working in a church, there are people who offer their offerings on a weekly basis to the general offering, which goes into the general fund, and the elders of the board kind of discern, you know, what they want to do with it, you know, all that sort of stuff. However, there's also ways that people can specifically designate funds to like, hey, I want to give X amount of money, but I want it to go to women's ministry or youth ministry or children's ministry. So they for instance, I remember one in particular. This was a number of years ago, but this one guy who had grown up in the church, had moved away, raised his own family, ended up giving a donation of several $1,000s to the church, specifically earmarked for youth ministry, because it was the youth group and the youth pastor that led him to Christ for the first time. So he was saying that as a way to be grateful for that experience and to honor God with that, I want to make sure that the youth ministry has this money to function well. So again, he could have just given it to the general offering, but he chose to specifically earmark it for youth ministry. And I think that it's a little bit of a similar parallel of the different offerings in Leviticus as a way to express thankfulness to God in different areas of your life. Like for instance, the sin offering. I want to present my sin offering because I want to make sure that God knows I'm thankful for the forgiveness of sins. I want to offer the grain offering because I want God to know that I appreciate the continued sustenance that the land provides. So there's these different functions of these offerings that cover all aspects of somebody's life. So yeah, I think
again, especially as the Israelites are figuring out what it means to be human together.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good moment to segue into our second section. So we talked about approaching holiness in chapters 1 through 10. And again, the approaching holiness is like how to purify yourselves, how to offer the sacrifices in a way that God will accept them, all that stuff. Section 2 of Leviticus, becoming holy like God is holy, in chapters 11 through 27. So why so many festivals?
I mean, I don't know if this is a trick question, and it's like one of those few instances where the Bible actually has a genuine, like, here's why moment. But remembering who you are as a people, remembering where you come from.
Yep.
Every single festival there has to do in one way or another to a very historic Israelite moment. You know, Passover, being freed from Egypt. Trumpets, the breaking into Jericho.
Yeah.
So now I've started down a path I can't finish walking down. But each one is attached to a different a different important narrative to the Israelite story.
Right. And as I was thinking about that question myself, it objectively you can say like, oh, well, that's kind of a lot of celebrations. But then I was thinking a little bit deeper about, again, the story of Israel, where they're at in their history, that sort of thing. And then I realized, like, I think it's easy to break the Sabbath. I think it's easy to revert back to kind of just working 7 days a week and just toiling and toiling and toiling. So festivals, I think, operate very much like holidays do in the United States, federal holidays, where the federal government has said this is a day off of work. This is we are going to recognize this as a break from work. For instance, it's ever since, I believe, FDR, the president has always declared a day of Thanksgiving on the fourth Thursday of November.
But Jeff, we all know that's just a corporate sellout holiday to sell turkeys and cranberries.
Sure, but you can still be thankful.
Yeah.
But
I'm gonna jump in if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Key to celebrating holidays, as well as even more importantly, Sabbath, the ritual.
Mm-hmm.
I think like those privileged enough to have a 5-day-a-week 9 to 5 miss out on this, right?
Sure.
Very, very easily miss out on this. Is that Sabbath is an intentional leaning in to recognizing the fact that God will provide for you. Mm-hmm. Because here's the foundational question in response to a God who says, every seventh day, rest. Mm-hmm. Here's the logical, but what if question. If I have a day where I can continue to harvest grain and provide for not only myself, but my family and my clan, my tribe, mm-hmm. and I have the opportunity to do that, but don't, why the hell do I not? Right?
Yeah.
Like if I have a choice between resting for a day because I'm told to, or going out and getting food to survive, why would I not? This is the manna from heaven story. Mm-hmm. The Israelites can't fathom not collecting more.
Yeah.
Because why would you not?
Yeah.
Why would you not have that security? Why would you not choose to take care of yourself? Because, and here's the reason for Sabbath, is to remember that God is in control, that God is providing for you, that God is going to give you enough daily bread. Yeah,
and that's a great point, because the children's pastor here in Santa Barbara is a guy named Andrew. So shout out Pastor Andrew. He preached on honor the Sabbath, keep it holy, and he said that one of the main points of taking a Sabbath every seventh day is a way to remind yourself that God is enough. Mm-hmm. So the point being, like, you can strive 6 days of the week, but on the seventh, you pause and you remember that God is the source of your abundance. God is the source of your sustenance and ability to live. So absolutely, I think that's a perfect point. And I think going back to the idea of these festivals providing natural breaks for Israel, again, think about working in Israel. Like, part of the thing about slavery in Israel is they had no days off. You know how people who go to the gym, they're just like, no days off. Which has an interesting
people who go to the gym and slaves. Same.
Well,
right.
But the point I'm trying to make, though, is that even people who are hardcore gym rats, who are no days off, we go every day.
Yeah.
There are psychologists and health care professionals that have said your body needs to rest. So, like, if you're lifting weights, you have to rest at least 2 days a week in order for your body to like reap the benefits of your working out. Otherwise, you're just destroying your muscles. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the idea again of like festivals functioning as this, you don't have to work until you die. Like, you don't have to work nonstop from year in, year out. There are these built-in breaks where you can stop and celebrate and feast. So,
yeah,
I like that about Leviticus. I like that about the outlining of these festivals, simply because it reminds us that God is a God of rest and abundance, and a God of blessing, because these festivals are a blessing. They are a chance for Israel to experience the lavishness and abundance of God. And later on, they function as a political thing too, because Solomon invited me. But that's here in Leviticus. The very first time they're mentioned is a way for God to the way for Israel to experience the overflowing abundance of God. So yeah.
Also, let's just throw this in too.
Yeah.
Just an innately human component to it as well, right? Like all humans celebrate.
Yeah. Yeah.
In one way, shape, form, ritual, or another. We all celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something reassuring in Leviticus of like, oh, like the Israelites celebrate too.
Yeah. 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 So, Jeremy, that brings us to last call.
Mm-hmm.
And last call for our viewers is how we wrap up, and we just have our final thoughts of the book. Before we get into last call or our final thoughts, I just wanted to share a little bit of what's upcoming that we're pretty excited about. So next episode is going to be the book of Numbers, another one of those Old Testament Pentateuch books that people tend to skip over and just like, whatever.
You love road trips, and Numbers is the book for you.
Oh yeah. We will talk about Numbers in great depth, and then the episode after that is Deuteronomy. It'll be the last book of the Pentateuch. So I'm super excited, because the episode of Deuteronomy, we are actually going to be doing our first in-person episode. So Jeremy and I will be in the same place. We'll be side to side for the first time for this whole experience. So we're excited for that. And then Jeremy, you chose the next section of what we're going to talk about. So why don't you let the viewers know what we're going to go into after we're finished with the Pentateuch?
Yeah. From our conversations, I'm remembering 2 front runners.
Okay. Yeah.
It's Judges, yeah.
Yes, it's Judges.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the Judges, similar to Leviticus, a book of like, slaughtering people and primitive stuff that Christians don't like to look at. We like, the grace and love and peace, hippie Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But like that Jesus still involves judges. So
we
take
like
a deep dive on that.
We like the Joshua who blows the trumpet and Jericho comes tumbling down. We don't like the blood-soaked Joshua.
Mm-hmm. We like David, who's like, a little kid throwing a stone. We don't like David cutting off, all the foreskins of the Philistines. And
we like calm, gentle Elijah, not the one, or Elijah or Elisha. I always get those two mixed up. We like the calm version of them, not the one who's ordering, the 5,000 priests of Baal being slaughtered in the Valley of Hinnom.
Oh, that one. I was gonna, I thought you were going a different route with that, of like the Elisha who provides a bunch of oil for a widow, not the Elisha who like summons 2 she-bears to maul 42 children to death.
Yep.
Or not all of them. I think some get away.
Right. To tell the tale.
Anyway, that's why it's in the Bible. Those little kids ran home and like, Mom, Dad, there's a bald dude who attacked us with bears.
And being the parents they were, probably like, well, did you do anything to provoke him? But anyway,
we only jeered at him a little bit.
Right. We are going to be going into the book of Judges, and instead of dedicating just one episode to the entire book, what we've chosen to do is we're going to break the book up into several different episodes and talk about the specific judges and the context of them, and all that sort of stuff. So that'll be our next section after we get done with the Pentateuch. So we're pretty excited about that. All right, so bringing it back to the Pentateuch, Last call, Jeremy. Book of Leviticus. Go.
Highly underrated. Leviticus has so much to give.
Mm.
If we can just like scratch underneath the surface just a little bit.
Yeah.
I understand why a lot of Christians don't like Leviticus. I also understand why Leviticus is marked by the violence and the animal sacrifice and Jesus saying like, I've come to fulfill the law, therefore checkmate, like don't need to talk about it. But we do.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Jesus is quoting Leviticus when he says love your neighbor.
Yeah.
And especially to our modern day setting, we lose out on a whole lot of what we can learn from this ancient wisdom when we write it off.
Yes.
As a book that we don't have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would agree. I think my last call, my final thoughts would be similar to of like, if we as Christians, if we as Christ followers take our discipleship of Christ seriously, then we have to be familiar with what Christ familiarized himself with. And that is the Old Testament, that is the prophets, and that is the Psalms and the Pentateuch and the law. Like Jesus was thoroughly versed in those things. So if we are to understand some of the depth and the nuance of what Jesus instructs us to do, we have to be people of that as well. So I think you're exactly right, and I agree 100% of like Leviticus is an underrated book because I think we miss a lot of the depth of who Jesus is and what Jesus says when we write it off as kind of like, well, it doesn't really apply to us anymore. Because it may be a highly technical book, but people produce instructional pamphlets for a reason, because people need to know how things operate. That doesn't mean we all read it in depth. It means that we as humans need an instruction manual to know how something works. And I think that the book of Leviticus is an instruction manual of how the idea of sacrificial systems and offerings work and function, and we need that. So good stuff, man. Look at us. We talked for a long time about the book of Leviticus. I was just like, oh, we probably won't talk that long.
We can go through it quick. You can't.
Yeah. Well, until next time, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening, however you choose to participate. If you have any questions, comments, or I don't know, concerns, I guess, you can submit them in the comment section down below. If you're new here, this is what we're about. We're about talking about the Bible. We're talking, depth of theology and what it means for us today. We like beer. We like drinking and talking, and that's what you're going to get here. So if you're into that, go ahead and subscribe. And we'll welcome to the Thursdays Theology family. Other than that, we will see you next time on the grain offering. And until then, I'm Jeff.
I'm Jeremy.
And this has been our grain offering.